So, yeah, now that COVID is in the rear view, like I've said before, we really need to go back and review what people did wrong and what lessons to be learned. Not holding out much hope that a lot of these people will be held accountable for their actions, but they should be. But at least we can learn for next time, because there will be a next time. There will be another epidemic or another pandemic. They happen. They've happened throughout human history. This just seems to be the only time we've just gone crazy over it for some reason. So, last time I did something like this, I got a community strike for it. I got a community strike in January that didn't come off until August. They're not supposed to last that long. And I kept, tweeting to Team YouTube about it. And they said, oh, we're looking into it. And it just ended up expiring on its own. They didn't do anything. It was actually 2 strikes, but yeah, they're not supposed to last that long. They're also supposed to give you a warning first. They didn't do that. So, yeah, they're breaking their own rules. They're breaking their own rules. But hopefully now things are calming down and we can actually go back and do a little more of a retrospective about the things that we should have been doing and the people we should have been listening to and the people we should not have been listening to and the voices that maybe we shouldn't have been censoring. And so this one, like last time, that time I got the community strike, what was I doing? I was reading out the peer-reviewed science. Well, I'm going to do that again. Here we are in. This is on Science Direct. This is an Elsevier publication. Elsevier. New Microbes and New Infections. Volume 55. October 2023. Last month. So. Sorry, just had to get a foot pedal in place there. Yeah, so this is looking at hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. And you might remember this because Trump mentioned hydroxychloroquine. And as I pointed out at the time, all he was doing was saying what was on the CDC's website at the time. And yet for some reason, everyone hit the ceiling saying, oh, he wants people to drink, what was it, aquarium bleach or something like that because it has HCQ in it? Yeah. Nope, this is another drug. And they also tried saying like, oh, he's got all the stock in the pharmaceutical companies and they'll make all this money if it's it's a generic. He's not going to make any money from that. You know what they will make money from? Pavilavir and remdesivir, because those are still under patent. This is generic. They didn't like the generics. The one I got the strike for was ivermectin. That's a generic. They didn't like the generics. They wanted to push the ones still under patent. Kinda makes you wonder, doesn't it? But we'll look through this. Yeah, and you need this kind of thing. This is in a database of over 30,000 COVID-19 patients. That's a pretty good sample size. Now, there are a couple of issues with this study, which I'll go over, because no study is perfect, and I mean, we're kind of limited now in what we can do. At the time, before they went crazy, and you had that you remember that fraudulent study where they just made up all of these deaths that were coming from these hospitals in, I think, Sydney, and the hospitals were like, what are you talking about? That didn't happen. We never gave you any data. We never gave you that. We never told you that. And then the WHO hit the ceiling like, oh, we're going to ban all research into HCQ. Maybe, just maybe, banning scientific research isn't a good idea. Especially when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So, all we can do now is retrospective, but that's what this is. And the problem is the randomized clinical trials just never really had the strength to be, they were all very preliminary and they couldn't show, and people were using to say, see, that's proof this doesn't work, where it was like a sample size of 10, without the drug. And that went down to 3 with the drug. But the drug's not effective because the sample size is too low and it's within the margin of error. Well, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It means you can't use the study for that because the sample size is too low. And we'll see part of that here in this study as well. But this is 30,423 patients with COVID-19 in Marseille, France. Marseille. I'm not sure how this is pronounced. I can't pronounce French stuff. But that's going to be the first problem. This is, well, it's a two-edged sword. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because you've got homogeneity. It's a bad thing because you've got homogeneity. So you've got a good consistency here, which means it's a lot better at teasing out data. But it does mean, like, if you did this in China, would you get the same results? Is there something about, like, being Asian or having the diet they have there or whatever that would make this have a difference? You can't answer questions like that, but this is good for what it's good for, so. All right, 30,000 patients for whom information on treatment was available. 0.82% of patients treated with HCQ-AZ died, and that's the hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. So 0.82% compared to 4.89% who did not receive treatment with HCQ-AZ. HCQ-AZ therapy was associated with a lower mortality than treatment without it. After adjustment for sex, age, period, and patient management, it was associated with a significantly lower mortality rate. On a subsample of 16,000 patients, it was still associated with a significantly lower mortality rate after adjustment for sex, age, period, patient management, vaccination status, and comorbidities. Analysis of this large online database showed that HCQ-AZ was consistently associated with the lowest mortality. Which means that, if this is true, then a lot of lives could have been saved if the news media and the WHO and all of these authoritarians hadn't decided to swing down the banhammer and just basically stop any good research into this treatment, this combination of HCQ and azithromycin. If you have a loved one who died of COVID, you might have wanted to know about that, right? All right. The underpowered nature of the studies means that it is not possible to reach conclusion as to the lack or otherwise of efficacy. Moreover, in these conditions where patient recruitment and standard of care is likely to vary widely between recruiting centers, the Simpson paradox would arise. And so they're not talking about this particular study. They're talking about doing the random control trials that happened throughout the outbreak. I probably should have backed up a little further to this part where it says many RCTs, particularly those conducted during the outbreak, were published or stopped at an early stage. And that's what that's what I just told you about when the WHO swung the banhammer there, despite the fact that the calculated sample size of patients had not yet been achieved. They didn't have enough to look at, so. And also, the Simpson paradox, I've got a video on this. There's a quickie on it where I demonstrate it with some cards, and it's really clear. And it's very counterintuitive because one of the cognitive deficits in humans is that when we think about different categories and different groups, we tend to kind of think of all the groups as being the same size. But when you got one group that's bigger than another, and especially in unpredictable ways, you can get this Simpson paradox, where the example was, it was at UC Berkeley, and they were trying to figure out why there was such low recruitment for women in STEM fields, and they found out that there wasn't. It was just showing up that way because, there were a lot fewer people going into STEM fields overall than there was in the other fields, like, I guess, liberal arts and stuff like that. So you have those different sizes of groups that can make that paradox. In contrast, the retrospective aspect of observational studies suffers from a selection bias and misclassification, or an information bias, for which multivariable regression, propensity score matching, and other statistical methods, while not perfect, would improve the selection bias and reinforce internal validity. Because RCTs, that's randomized controlled trials, and other prospective trials are no longer possible due to the disappearance of the epidemic, it is essential to collect retrospective data and make them available to the scientific and medical community. While being aware of the disadvantages of observational studies, which is what this one is, we believe that this study on more than 30,000 patients, the largest monocentric cohort worldwide, could provide important insights for policymakers on the treatment of COVID with the hydroxychloroquine azithromycin combination. Now, this is something I've said before. People like, poo-pooing observational studies and randomized clinical trials are like the gold standard. Well, it kind of depends. All other things being equal, yeah, that's true. But if you've got an RCT with a low sample size and it's not very well done and the methodology isn't good, versus a good observational study with good methodology and a large sample size, the observational study is going to win out. So don't let that bias keep you from learning the truth. Now, something I think that's important to point out here in the data, all data were anonymized. The final data set available in the online database contained the following variables: age as a range, gender, pandemic period, outpatient, inpatient, HCQ-AZ, IVM, virus genomic variant, ICU treatment, time of death, vaccination status, obesity, diabetes, blood pressure, asthma, cancer, immunodeficiency, chronic cardiac disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and autoimmune disease. So, those were the variables it had to look at. What it couldn't do was, like, since it just had the person's age range, it couldn't look at, like, the actual age or try and do other statistics on age, like, mean, range, median, things like that, to tease out more data from it. And that's a problem with having to go from open source data. If you could have a more proper study where you can get, some de-anonymized data with the proper privacy controls, because patients still deserve their privacy. But maybe you can get some better data out of this. But that's what they had to work with, and that's pretty significant. This is nothing to sneeze at here. As the aim of this study was to test whether HCQ-AZ was associated with a different mortality compared to other treatments, we first compared patients treated with and without the HCQ-AZ combination. Then, the role of each individual drug, so they're looking at HCQ and AZ together, but they're also pulling it apart to look at individual drugs, HCQ-AZ or IVM, was analyzed regardless of the prescription of any of the other two drugs. In this approach, each drug was included as a binary covariate in the models. Did you get it, or did you not? Given that the French National Death Registry is exhaustive, we considered that there were no missing data regarding outcomes. No data was missing regarding sex or period of admission. Treatment data were missing for a total of 221 patients, since the proportion of patients with missing treatment data was very low, 0.7%, they were excluded from the univariate and multivariable analyses of associations between treatment and death. And also, just another quick little disclaimer thing here in the results. It says, due to the anonymization process of the database, mean and median age values were not available. I just mentioned that because they had a range. They just say, like, men, well, okay, here we are. If we scroll down a little bit more, we'll see them. You had, age less than 50, age 50 to 69, age 70 to 89, and then above 89. And so you couldn't break it down into smaller groups or do any kind of overall statistics with that. Alright, so among the included variables, age was the strongest risk factor for death, as we knew it would be from the beginning. Male sex was a risk factor for death. You're more likely to die from it if you're male than female. A peak of mortality was observed during period 4, which is winter 2020 to 2021, and a minimum was observed in period 6, July to September 2021. Among the 4 major variants, the B1160 variant, which predominated during period 4, was associated with the highest mortality. And again, I'm going to let you look at the details if you want to. You've got the link. You can read the whole thing. Just going to kind of hit the highlights, and I'm also avoiding all the techie mumbo jumbo and just trying to get you the things that the layperson can really grab a hold of. So, the important part, the association between the treatment regimen and mortality. Of the 30,202 patients for whom treatment information was available, 0.82, I mentioned this before in the abstract, 0.82 treated with HCQ-AZ died compared to 4.89 who did not. Overall, HCQ-AZ was associated with a lower mortality than treatment without it. After adjustment for sex, age, period, and type of patient management, which is inpatient or outpatient, HCQ-AZ continued to be associated with a significantly lower mortality rate. Overall mortality among outpatients treated with HCQ-AZ was extremely low. Data. Alright, among inpatients and outpatients, the association between the treatment variable, HCQ-AZ, and outcome was not significantly different according to sex, period, or variant. This contrasts with the fact that prescription rates changed significantly over time among inpatients. However, the association was significantly different according to patient care setting and age, with a maximal effect size among outpatients aged between 50 and 89 years. Comparing HCQ-AZ with all other different combinations of treatment, mortality was never significantly different when HCQ was used from the outset in the comparator group, HCQ only or HCQ with IVM. This led us to analyze the role of each drug independently. When each drug was included as a binary covariate in the models, no difference in survival was found for AZ or IVM. Only HCQ was associated with lower mortality, and this was confirmed both for outpatients and inpatients. And so I'm not doing most of the diagrams, but this one is probably worth looking at. And you'll notice where, the only one we don't have good data for is HCQ with IVM. You see how it says N equals 17? That's not a big sample size. You can't really include a lot from that. like they were trying to do with a lot of the other studies where they tried to say it didn't work. But we've got better results in some of these others. And so you can see the data there. If you have AZ only, the mortality was 7.4. Other treatment, anything else, the mortality was 2.0. So those treatments were better than AZ only. IVM with AZ was 4.3. IVM only was 9.2. That didn't do very well. HCQ only, it's down to 1.1. That's looking pretty good there. IVM with AZ is 4.9. And of course, the big one in the middle there, HCQ-AZ, the mortality is 0.8%. So when you look at these in different combinations, looks like that's the combination you want. All right, down to discussion. Among the limitations of this analysis, the monocentric nature of the cohort may have meant that the population of this center differed from the populations of other centers. Like I said earlier, if they did it in Australia, if they did it in, California, how would it have been different? The monocentric nature of the study might limit the generalizability of the findings, but this design might also reinforce internal validity when you're comparing one thing to another. Besides the limitation of patient selection, there is also the limitation of some physicians being outliers in the institution itself, perhaps thus leading to other subtle additional variations in patient care. Non-prescription of HCQ was previously reported in details, the first reason being not proposed by the physician, then patient with cardiac contraindication, patient refusing the treatment, patient with potential risk for interaction in others. Moreover, the monocentric nature of this study attenuates the selection bias in relation with a common standard of care. It's in one place, so they're all being, as opposed to looking at different parts of the world where the treatment methods and all of the technology available to them and everything else might be all over the place. The role of severity of the disease in the outcome is also clearly a limitation of this analysis and unfortunately cannot be analyzed in this database because the NEWS score is not available. That's the National Early Warning Score. However, an article was previously published on the first 3,737 patients followed up in this center in which the NEWS score was available. The significant association between treatment with HCQ-AZ 3 days or more and the reduction of risk of death was confirmed by 2 different propensity score methods, showing that this association was independent of age, comorbidities, and severity of the disease. So that's fairly consistent that this stuff pretty much worked. While observational studies also have confounding factors, as discussed above, significant effect estimate differences between RCTs and observational studies are more likely to be linked to the quality of the study rather than to its design. In any case, since the epidemic has now vanished, it is no longer possible to conduct RCTs. Only observational studies can bring any more insights to support policymakers with repositioning hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of COVID-19. This analysis of a database of 30,423 patients treated with hydroxychloroquine at a standard dosage of 200 milligrams 3 times a day shows that it reduces mortality in patients with COVID-19. And the conclusion? Overall, this study represents the largest single-center study evaluating HCQ-AZ in the treatment of COVID-19. Similarly to other large observational studies, it concludes that HCQ would have saved lives. In a spirit of open science, we encourage investigators to reanalyze similar fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable databases and to report their findings. Yeah, I mean, you can never say that one study is the end-all and be-all, But dang, that looks like some good data to me. And that looks like all the time they spent poo-pooing HCQ and just trying to just cut out all discussion and all study of that and ivermectin and all of these other possibilities. What harm did that do? How many people died who didn't have to? That's something that needs a spotlight put on it. And that's something that a lot of people need to be made to answer for. And how can you just do that? And then say, oh, well, we didn't know, we were doing the best we could. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. Cutting off avenues of study is not doing the best you could. You know, swinging down an authoritarian hammer and saying it will be this way is not the best you can do. That's not what's best for science. That's not what's best for people. It's not what's best for humanity. There's no excuse for it whatsoever. None. And I guess that's all there really is to say about it. Other than thank you very much for watching, comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And as always, donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. Make sure you are subscribed. Look down and see if you're like, well, I'm subscribed. You look down, oh, wait, I'm not subscribed. That's happening a lot. And it's not just to, political channels or whatever. I've seen a lot of fairly mainstream channels say that. Look down, make sure you're still subscribed. And this is just a thing that happens. It's YouTube's screwy system, so make sure you're still subscribed. And make sure you go and donate. You can become a supporter at Patreon or Subscribestar. Get these videos earlier ad-free. Or you can go to PayPal, Venmo, cryptocurrency, and donate however much you want. Every little bit helps. A few pennies in crypto is probably worth more than all the ads you could play on this video. So that's really appreciated. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.